Cool.
How's it going, YouTube? Devin here again with Make Anything, and today we're going to talk about my car. I'm still driving my first car. It's a '99 BMW and I love it. We've been through a lot. People have hit me from the back, from the front. My radiator blew up, my air conditioning goes out. It's really got a mind of its own. Despite being a really hands-on person, I'm actually not too great with cars. But there's one thing that recently happened that I can actually fix. Someone stole my hood emblem. Instead of just being bummed about it, I took this as an opportunity to make my own custom emblem. And that's what I'm gonna do today, so let's go through the process and see what it takes. So the very first thing I'm gonna do is use my calipers and this fancy tool called a contour gauge to figure out the dimensions of the emblem. And then I'm gonna go ahead and trace it out on paper, and that allows me to get a decent estimate of how tall the dome is. Before going into 3D, I found the vector logo of BMW online, and I took that into Illustrator, and I turned that into Lineworks so I could bring it into SolidWorks. So I go to File, Export, and I export it as a DXF. I make sure to set the units to 1 inch equals 1 unit, so it matches the units that SolidWorks imports them in. Once I've got that, I'll open up SolidWorks and make a new part. I'm going to draw a circle on the top plane and set it to the diameter of the emblem based on my measurements. Then I'm going to create just a 0.2mm extrude so that I could use this fancy dome feature. And if you don't see the feature here, you can go up to the command line and just type in dome. I make that dome 6mm based on my measurements. And this is actually just going to be my support material. So I'm going to offset this top surface by 0.2mm. And that will be the start of my actual emblem, which is on top of the support material. Then I can use a surface feature called thicken to, well, of course, add thickness to the surface. I thickened by 5mm just to start out. The next thing I'm going to do is make a plane that's parallel to the top plane by holding down Control and dragging up on the top plane. With that top plane selected, from the toolbar I'll select Insert DXF DWG, and I'll bring in that file that I made earlier. As you can see, the units are also in inches. And I'll select Define Sketch Origin and click on the center, just to get things roughly lined up. And the emblem just happens to be almost the right size already, but I'm still going to create this reference circle to make sure it's perfect. I'll make it the proper diameter, and then I'll turn that into a construction line. Then I can select just the logo. And then from the sketch tools, I'll select Scale and get the size right. And to make sure it's perfectly centered, I can use the Move tool. I can select Move Entities, use the From To parameter, select the center of my BMW logo, and then click on the origin. And that'll make sure it's perfectly lined up. And then we're going to actually use this sketch for a few things. So first I'm going to select the outer circle and do an extruded cut. I'll just pull the cylinder through. Then I'm just going to use this flip side to cut option to make the emblem a perfect cylinder around the edges. And then we're going to go back into that extrude feature and reselect that sketch to select the graphics that we want to cut out. So I tried to do the cut here, but SolidWorks wasn't having it. And this will happen from time to time, especially with vectors that you import that weren't exactly made for 3D modeling. And usually you just gotta go through and kind of play detective and figure out what's going wrong. You can try selecting one contour at a time to figure out what the culprit is. So in this case I saw that it was the cross that wasn't letting it happen. And then I remembered that SolidWorks really doesn't like when two parts meet right at a single point, like the cross does right here. So I'll do this little trick where I create a super tiny circle and then trim away so that these parts are no longer actually touching, even though when you print it out you won't even notice. So with that small change, I can go back into the extrude feature, and now it works. So I'll do an extruded cut 3mm from the surface. So once I got this far, I thought my emblem was looking a little too thick, so I changed the thickness down to 3mm. and made this offset 2.5. That made the thinnest parts 0.5 millimeters thick, which is pretty thin, and I realized that when I printed it out. So to print this thing, I cut some painter's tape to put on the build plate, since I'm printing in PLA, and I rub in some hairspray, which really helps things stick to the build plate. After printing, I get my piece off using my trusty butter knife, and I separate the emblem from the support material using a clay tool. But not everything is printed just right. So I open up SolidWorks again to make the changes for a better part. I reduced the depth of the extrude cut to 1.5 millimeters, and since I decided to print the next version at a higher resolution on my printer, I reduced the surface offset from 0.2 millimeters to 0.15 millimeters. With my improved version printed out, I began sanding my part to make it really smooth and nice, and I applied several layers of primer. First I did black primer, then I put white primer on top so that I would sand that off on the top layers. Because I was a little impatient with applying my primer, rather than sanding off, it ended up just smearing and turning out really bad. So I actually just had to start over from scratch. So the next time around, I decided to just do white primer and then sand away to the black filament on the top. And about halfway through sanding, I thought it looked really cool, so I decided not to sand off all the paint. And to finish it off, I gave it a gloss coating. So in the end, I had 4 versions of this emblem. The first one was too thin and it had some holes in it. The second, I applied too much paint and it just didn't work out. With the third, I was just a little bit reckless taking it off of the build plate and it ended up chipping. And with my 4th attempt, I think I just about nailed it. It came out really cool. The graphics stand out really clearly, but it also shows all the layers from the print, which is a pretty unique look. So the last thing I had to do was stick this on my car. So I'm using a 2-part epoxy called Quick Cure, and when I mix those two together, I have 5 minutes to apply it onto my part and stick it on my car. So I make sure to get a nice even coverage. I put it in place and hold it there until the epoxy cures. And in the end, I have a nice finished emblem. Well, let me tell you guys, I'm pretty happy with how this came out. I was just hoping for something presentable, and what I ended up with was something really unique and pretty interesting to look at. Also, I'm using PLA here, which is a biodegradable plastic, so we're gonna see how long it lasts on the front of my car. And I'll keep you guys updated on whether it deteriorates or if it holds up well, or maybe someone will just steal it again. Anyways, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you subscribe to see all the future projects I come up with. There's definitely a lot of things on the horizon, but I'm also very open to suggestions, so if you want to see anything get made, leave me a comment and I'll try to respond. Alright, until next time. Back to printing.